Hello, welcome back. This is Kate with Go With the Flow. Today, instead of me interviewing somebody, we are going to show you guys a pre-recorded interview that Tess, a former Writing Center mentor, did with Dr. Rothschild. So this is all pre-recorded. Tess came up with all the questions. I will just be saying the questions because it was originally a video and she had title cards for her questions. So in order to transfer it over to audio, I will be saying the questions, but again, Tess came up with them. All right, so here is the interview now. For the first segment that Dr. Rothschild did, she will be talking about her writing experience.
I am not a passionate writer first. And you know this about me already, but I have a lot of questions. The only reason that I write is I want to try to figure out the answers to my questions. So I don't when I write an email, I enjoy it, but it's not really like my passion to craft an email. I don't write poetry. I mean, I have a little bit and I like the challenge of it, but I don't have a passion for writing. I have a passion for my subject because I have so many questions and I use writing as a tool for figuring out the answers to my questions.
The next segment will be about Dr. Rothschild's writing process.
I definitely have a regimen, which I use because I love, not because I feel bound to it. It's not like a diet where I can never eat what I want. It's more like a diet where I get to eat exactly what I want, that kind of thing. I love this process, which I'll describe to you now. The process is that begins with what I'd call wonder. You have to wonder something. And so I wonder a lot of things about the texts that I read. Some people wonder about pop stars, and so they read People magazine or whatever. That's a curiosity that's genuine. When you're in the grocery store line and you see the People magazine and you see Brad Pitt on the front and you think, I wonder what's going on. Is he still married? Whatever, you wonder. I actually have that kind of curiosity to open the magazine about my field. So I start with that. I don't start writing, well, unless I have to, like a recommendation for a student or whatever, where I don't really wonder anything. I just have to write this. But most of my writing happens when I think, what in the world is going on? Like I did a project in the last 6 months where I didn't need this project and I didn't like the text and didn't want to work on it. But I saw something and I'm like, I think I know what's going on here that nobody else saw. And I'm like, I think I have to write this down. You know what I mean? So I end up in projects that I maybe don't want to be in, shouldn't be in, should be doing other things, have made other commitments and so on. So anyway, wonder, it's super crucial. And I want to really emphasize that because the rest is sort of going to flow from there and you're probably familiar with it. So then I have to ascertain a critical question. A critical question means a question that's answerable. So I can't go, is the New Testament correct or what? It's not an answerable question. I have to say, was Paul a dwarf? Did he have dwarfism? And then I could say, okay, how would we know? And what in antiquity did they say about dwarves? And what were characteristics of dwarves then and now? And all of that kind of thing. So I need a critical question. Then I need to review the past literature on the topic. The very first thing I always do is go, somebody already figured this out. And that's when you find out that no one's figured it out, or you're pretty sure no one's figured it out. I usually check with my friends too. I'm like, did anybody say like this? Or did anybody see? Because I'm not seeing it anywhere. I check the major commentaries. I check all the places where it would be. Then if I still have a critical question and nobody's answered it to the extent that I can tell it anyway. And I have to check across languages, of course, in French and in German and all the way back, to the time when the text was written. So that's a long step kind of. Then I accumulate data. Why do I think that Paul, I'm using this crazy example, but Paul was, suffered from short stature. I accumulate data and then I interpret the data and then I establish a hypothesis. Okay, I looked at all this data. I'm like, it seems to me that the way he characterizes himself and the things he says, he regards himself as short-statured, and the world did too, or something. So then I have a hypothesis. Then I anticipate objections. Why are people going to say there's no end? Then, you have to admit that, well, okay, nobody really calls him a short-statured man except this one text, or only in these 3 places, or why would people not have been more explicit about it in antiquity if this was the case, and so on. And then after that, I actually draft a paper. After that, I try to present it orally. So I'll sign up to a conference and say, I have a thesis and I want to present this paper. That's when you get, feedback. Sometimes it's time to throw the paper in the garbage can after that, because you realize that you weren't really on a path. But I haven't actually had that experience yet, knock on wood, because I do all the preparation work. So I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to get from my audience. And again, I use those graduate student friends of mine, or they used to be graduate students with me. They're adults now. And if all of that goes well, then I revise a written draft for a while. And I also usually will sit on the paper. I might present it a second time, but you want to sit on something because you never know what's going to occur to you, where you go, oh, I wanted to include that, or now I see it differently, or whatever. So you don't want to publish too quickly, and then eventually submit it to a journal and then revise it based on the comments from the journal and publish it. So that's my process, and I never veer from it.
In this next segment, Dr. Rothschild talks about peer review.
One of the most valuable parts of graduate school is the friends that you meet and the friends that you acquire, because what you learn when you graduate that's bad, you think graduation is good, but it can be bad, because now your professors are no longer paid to read your work and critique it and make it better. It's all on you to make it better, except if you have friends that you acquired in graduate school, because then, like my very first articles out of graduate school after I finished my first book, I was able to say, like a very good friend of mine who's also a scholar named Jim Kellhofer, I was able to say to Jim, hey, would you mind reading this? And he also was in the same process, just a little bit ahead of me. And he had great tips I still use. So I learned a lot from not only things he would say, don't say it this way, say it, don't use the passive, use the active, say, or the format of an article. He also he used to say, still does say what you're going to say it, and say what you said. So an academic article kind of does that. It's sort of redundant in some ways, but the introduction is sort of, here's what I'm going to say, and the content of the article is, I'm saying this, and then the conclusion is, this is what I just told you. So with some nuances, but I used to write like some kind of murder mystery or something, like I didn't want you to know until the very end of my book what to unveil the secrets or whatever. And he just said, Claire, you can't write like that. You're not a scientist if you write like that. You're a fiction writer, and you're trying to be a scientist, so don't write like that. So I received really so much good advice, from the details to the structure of an academic article from my friends in graduate school. The thing that can be annoying about peer review is when you read the peers' comments and you think they're wrong, or you just think that's like lame, and they think they're right, and you're like, but I'm pretty sure it's lame. It doesn't sound right to me, or you know what I mean? It doesn't sound clean enough or concise enough. So that I would consider one of the real strokes of luck that I've had in my life is to have friends that are really like Jim. And I have others too, a guy named Matt Calhoun. Most of them are men, because there's mostly men in my field, but just really excellent, top-notch writers who help me along. Critique really should be like a back rub, or something that you like, if you like a back rub. You know what I mean? Something that is, first of all, like my friends who are graduate students, they critique my work for free, and it's a huge amount of time on their part, and it's so an act of generosity. And my work, I'm going to look better, so it's incredible. So it's very important that we're careful in how we critique our peers and so on. And like, I have friends that are careful with me and I'm careful with them. So like, if I kind of come down kind of hard, I'll kind of write an email before it and say, oh, I hope you don't take this to the wrong way. When I read it, here's what I was thinking, and try to kind of explain, maybe it's my own lack of knowledge that made it seem like I wasn't persuaded by what you wrote or whatever. But I do think that touching on the the emotions around strong critique is important.
The next segment will be about conducting research in theology.
Okay, so the kind of research I do is historical, right? So I'm always picking ancient texts and trying to figure out what they mean and figure out if we could figure out what they mean. And so it means setting yourself in a different time and place completely and kind of assuming that you can get your head around what they're saying, right? And this involves other texts that are written at the same time, both by the same people group, like Christians or Jews, and by other people groups. Because, of course, if you were trying to share these texts with other people, they have to be understandable, right? So that's a huge historical leap. And there's so many problems with that you can hardly even begin, right? And there's continuity in human culture, fortunately, but there's also gigantic, different differences between us and people who came before us and cultures who came before us and people who use different language. Just the other day, a friend of mine in Finland made a joke, and I was with a group of people from all over the world, about 10 people, but like no one laughed. And he's our friend, and he's like, he does what we do, and yet humor doesn't translate, language sometimes doesn't translate, culture is just such a difficult thing. So that's one of the obvious differences in any kind of historical research. And then the number two I could talk at length about how there's no way we could be really doing any kind of real meaningful research on the New Testament, but is that our sources are so limited. So, and some sources were destroyed and some sources were just lost. And so the manuscripts that we have are the limitations on them. And then as 21 of 27 books in the New Testament, for an example, are letters. Well, letters are totally contingent. Like, see you at 5, you and I know what I mean. But 200 years from now, they're not going to know what you and I meant. Where would we meet? That we would meet on Zoom, say. So, yeah, the contingent nature of the texts, that people at the time knew what they were talking about, but 2,000 years later, we don't know what they're talking about. That's a problem. The limit on the number of sources that we have, and then the cultural gap or distance and in time and space and all of that, those are the real gigantic, insurmountable difficulties that people like me face.
This next segment is on finding the right source.
So I go to the primary text first, so the text in the original language. Now, my students, I don't usually take them to the text in the original language because most of them don't read the original languages. But so, yeah, I go to the primary text, and then I go to texts associated with them. So like in Paul's letters, for example, he cites the Jewish Bible. Right. So then we have to obviously move to the Jewish Bible. And also that's a different language or languages involved there. Sometimes when Paul's citing the Jewish Bible, which is originally in Hebrew, he cites it from the Greek translation of the Jewish Bible. So there's all these nuances. And from there, you really start at a philological level. Like, what do these words in these other languages mean? And are we sure they mean that? For example, the most famous probably concept for the study of the New Testament, or arguably, is faith, right? Well, that Greek word pistis is translated faith, but it actually means trust. So then you have to ask yourself, are those the same thing? Or because faith, you can have faith in something, right? So when you trust that something's true, or you believe in, and then you have like a doctrine, are those two things the same? So yeah, you have to talk about the individual words and their individual meanings. So we go to dictionaries. And dictionaries, right, are compilations of uses of a single word and then comparing across those uses. So then dictionaries. And then after that, there are some really very sophisticated encyclopedias that cover these concepts. The concepts, say, like of faith, or of a Gentile, or of scripture, the word scripture. So, and you can look up, or even of Paul or of Peter, and you can use these sophisticated encyclopedias are also a really excellent place to start to orient yourself. And then from then, the world is your oyster, because every time, say, a word like pistis is used anywhere in the culture around the same time might be relevant for informing how it's used in our own texts. So then you can move to ancient history that's nothing to do with Christianity, like ancient Roman history or military history, or you can move to writings about grammar and see if they talk about the use of any, of use of single words, or letters by pagans within 100 years, say, of our time frame, in both Greek and maybe in Latin and maybe in Hebrew as well, or Aramaic. So it spreads out from there.
In this segment, Dr. Rothschild talks about common setbacks others face.
So one thing that students face is that if they don't acquire all the languages well, then they're always limited in terms of how well they can understand what's happening in these texts. So the languages are really important. And I guess I would say, in the last, 5 or 6 years, I've done a little bit of work, at least teaching in English, the Quran. And I don't know Arabic. I know Hebrew, and there's some similarities, so I can kind of get away with it a little bit with students. But like my Arabic speaking students, I can make correspondences that they understand and are correct. But basically, learning Arabic is kind of a stumbling block for me that I'm not sure I'm ever going to get to. Some days I think I will, and that there's enough of life left and time and so on to master Arabic. Friends of mine have who work in the New Testament, but then other days I think it's enough just to manage the ones that I have and to interpret based on those languages.
The next segment is about how you should write in theology.
Students in my class, when they write short essays, essay answers, for example, on exams, they use too much creative license. You know what I mean? So rather than sticking to historical facts that we focus on in class, obviously the focus of the class, they revert to things they know and think, or believe, or used to believe, or think they're supposed to believe, or think someone else believes, or something. And none of that is what I teach. And I had never thought about it until this very minute, but it might come from what you're saying, that more exploratory writing one pedagogy. So what I cannot stand it when I get an essay answer and it says, I think that Christians should believe, when the question is, what is Paul telling us in Galatians 1:13? And so even an answer that says, Paul is telling us, and then quoting Galatians 1:13 might be better than saying, it says that all Christians should believe, and then it's their own dogma. And it's actually, I was trying to teach that is not actually in the text. The questions that I ask and that feedback, the answers that I want, and I tell you, that's what I'm looking for, or that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this or whatever. And we always, we discuss like that. I'm trying to train students to answer in the way that, by focusing on content. So what we're doing in my classes is critical, close, careful reading, very focused, very laser focused on what the texts say and therefore must mean, right? So it's interpretation. We call it exegesis, close reading, and then a sort of repeating in your own words what you think you read. And that is what I am looking for, is that students read that text and they say, this is Paul talking about this problem because this is what happened in his life, or so on. This is what people said about him and on. And what I'm not looking for is people veering too far away from close, careful, historically informed readings of these ancient texts. Sacred texts is people glaze over. They assume it's holy and it's correct and it's sacred. It's and then they where they might be more critical of Shakespeare, they glaze over when it comes to the sacred text. And that's another reason why they need firm, pushing.
This next segment is on preparing students for success.
I'll do one-on-one meetings and have students sit right by me and I'll work through it, and I'll say this paragraph says the same thing as the last one. We just absolutely can't. And I'll try to be positive, like maybe we could salvage this idea because you haven't really explored this, but this should come before that. This should come after. Do you see why? Like I like to do it in person too, because it's a little bit better than you got the paperback and it's all full of red marks or whatever. Yeah, and so I'm very, very hands-on in the nitty-gritty and iterations after iterations and iterations. And the other thing is that I have a process like the one that I described that I make students do step by step and turn in every single step of the way. And then they don't move on to the next step until the previous step is polished. And so it's not as depressing when you get something back because you're adding it to something that's perfect and you already have something that's perfect. So the next part needs just to be polished and students become aware, it took me a few iterations to polish that. It's going to take me a few to polish this. My goal is at the end of every semester when I teach these advanced courses where students are writing research papers is that everyone gets an A. So I don't want you to have taken the class. I don't think you should be able to make it through the class without ending up with an A, unless you just flake out so bad that you just don't turn in other, some aspects of or components of the final piece.
Okay, that concludes the interview. Thank you, Tess, for asking all those questions, and thank you, Dr. Rothschild, for her answers. Again, that was pre-recorded. It wasn't live, and I was just introducing the questions for audio format. This has been Go With The Flow. Thank you for joining us. Come back next time. There's an extended community hour on April 23rd where there's a super study kickoff. The Writing Center will have a table there. It's from 12 to 2 p.m. So look out for that. Bye. The thoughts and opinions expressed in this podcast are not Lewis University's. They are the individual parties' opinions who have spoken on the podcast. We recorded this in the WLRA podcast studio. To find out more about that, you can go to lewisu.edu.